Wow. Wow.
Wasn't that something, hey?
Kudos to Catherine Bujold again. She is amazing. Thank you, Catherine, for that amazing intro. That was great.
Pre-intro.
And that's the first intro. Exactly. That's the pre-intro.
Yep.
Welcome, Warren. How are you today?
Well, I'm good, Roy. How are you?
I'm doing well on this Sunday morning here in the U.S. at 11 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, 9 o'clock your time in Canada.
Yep.
And welcoming all our viewers that are out there. We see people that are actually have come in. We just want to address and say hello to them before we get started. Hello to Claudia. Hello to Missy. Hello to Jerry. I see Charlene is out there. Good morning, Charlene. Frida is joining us. Missy says she's got her coffee too. And Maria Angela is out there too. We are being joined from all over the U.S., so this is going to be pretty, and as well as internationally, which is amazing. So this is going to be a really great way to start off Breakaway with our first episode. So very excited about this.
Yes, welcome everybody, and thanks for joining in today. I know that over in the UK there was a time change last night, so I'm not sure if it's 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. over there, but I hope everybody allowed for that in case StreamYard and Facebook didn't. Hopefully you can make it. Either way, this will still be recorded into the new YouTube channel that we started for Space 1999 this episode. So all these episodes moving along over the next year will be archived there in case you can't. Well, and actually this one being live is sort of a one-off. We're going to do a few live streams throughout the year, but the majority of them we're actually going to pre-record. It's just going to make things a little easier for Roy and I to coordinate with everybody's schedule. But either way, they'll drop each and every Sunday. Haven't really decided on the time yet, but you'll see them each Sunday moving forward. And as Roy and I said in the pilot, the idea is to sort of discuss each episode or one episode per week according to production order. So of course we're starting with Breakaway today, and we have a couple of special guests joining us as well. But before we get into that, Roy, anything else real quick?
No, I think we should run the really cool intro that we've got and go from there and kick us off with Breakaway.
For sure. We'll dive right in.
Nice intro.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Welcome.
Hi, welcome. Yeah, isn't that amazing? Roy and I, when we first saw it, I mean, and again, Catherine's work, I mean, that is such a beautiful montage because if you didn't notice, it's all 24 episodes of year one. So, and again, in production order, it's perfect for what we're setting up here. So, yeah, very nice. And welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome,
nice
guys.
to be here.
Really
Are
nice
you guys
to have
going
you.
in those Moonbase Alpha suits for Halloween?
Can't eat the candy with the helmets on.
True. Flip the visor up real quick.
Exactly. Had to suck it in too when putting those on. Oh my goodness.
Oh yes, we had to manipulate those photos. Trust me, those spacesuits are not kind when it comes to the.
Oh man.
But that was so much fun, Roy. I mean, that was and Ben. I mean, yeah, David. Unfortunately, you couldn't make it, but that Eagle cockpit was spectacular last month. Yeah,
I wish, but just things didn't play out the way I'd hoped.
Yeah.
Hide
Hats
yourself.
off to Daryl and crew, boy. They knocked it out of the park for that one.
Yeah, it's great photos.
Yeah, really something. So for our inaugural episode, then we'll again dive right in, fellas, and just start off here and maybe cover a little bit of the history of Breakaway and the early stages of the series. Everybody knows about how it was originally conceptually to be a second season of UFO, and sort of morphed from there into a few different iterations. Dave, any thoughts on that?
Well, for those who don't know the story, they when UFO premiered on it was not really network television. CBS bought it for what they called their owned and operated stations, which were stations like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and they all ran it around the same time on Saturday night. It was at 7 o'clock, just before the network lineup, and that was back in the day when network Saturday night was really a powerhouse lineup, starting with All in the Family, which was the #1 show. So at the beginning, they got terrific ratings, to the point that Abe Mandel in New York said, yes, we want to commission a second series. So Jerry, who had already gone off and to do like the Protectors and stuff, got a team together of people who were not working on the Protectors to start developing UFO Series 2. And one of Mandel's mandates was he wanted the action to take place in outer space, because he felt that those were the stronger episodes. So they came up with a whole design that was centered on a gigantic moon base with a fleet of attack ships and stuff that would fight off the aliens. So about mid-series run for UFO, the ratings started to drop off. And there was a bit of panic because it was an extremely expensive show. They didn't promote it at the time, but UFO was probably just as expensive as Space 1999 to produce. And they decided to, pull the plug on it. But Jerry, being, aware of how much money was spent on pre-production, said, let me pitch a fresh idea, because he knew Lou Grade preferred selling new shows. He had a better time selling new shows than another series, which is why a lot of Jerry's shows only did like 1 or 2 series, and then he'd switch over to something new, because it was a lot easier for them to sell it. So they agreed on the condition that they hire American actors, which is how the Landaus became involved with the show. And the show went from, at one point, a half-hour show for primetime access to a full 1-hour show. So it developed along the way, and there were a lot of different scripts that were developed along the way. The first one, the Andersons themselves wrote a half-hour script called Zero G, which some pieces were pulled into other episodes or whatever. And eventually, as part of the American appeal for the show, they wanted an American writer. So Chris Penfold, who was brought in to develop UFO 2, was asked to step aside, and they brought in George Bellac, who was a well-known American writer, to do development of the show. He essentially took the premise and fleshed it out into a Bible for the show, as well as writing the first script. And Chris worked alongside with him as his editor. Eventually, Bellac and Jerry Anderson had a falling out in the early days before production began. Bellac was essentially paid off and went back to New York, and Chris Penfold took over, and he took his name off the script simply because he was very close to Bellac and really respected what he had done with the show. And Bellac wrote about 3 or 4 drafts from his initial draft to the final script, which Chris Penfold wrote. It started off called The Void Ahead. And there were 2 drafts under The Void Ahead based on feedback from the Andersons, from New York. And then eventually, as the show was cast, a lot of characters were changed slightly from early concepts to fit the actors who were cast for them. And then the last script turned in was called The Turning Point, which was Chris Penfold's rewrite. And just before they started shooting, he did a lot of changes again, and they changed the title to Breakaway. So there were about 4 drafts before the shooting script. But then, of course, it's well known that as Breakaway was not the first episode completed, so there were a lot of reshoots that went along the way. I think, if I remember correctly, and I could be wrong, but it's in the book. Like Nick Tate originally was supposed to play the astronaut Collins, who died at Area 2 after he broke the window.
Spoilers.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the episode, where are you? Where have you been?
And that's The Turning Point, right?
Right. Yeah. Area 2 was The Turning Point, which was, I think, too esoteric.
Yeah.
But as Nick was changed into the primary astronaut character, his last scenes to be shot for the pilot were the shots of Alan in orbit watching the Breakaway. And those were shot months later. I mean, you could tell some of the reshoots by the fact that the collars on the spacesuits change.
Right.
From the puffy ones to the ribbed ones. Well, like someone just said, they kept them because Lee Katzin said, "Oh, this guy is good. Let's keep him. He's got personality," and that's what they needed. They Katzin, I'm sure, was instrumental in the casting of Breakaway and for the cast of the show, because it's supposed to be an international moon base, and this was Balak's design all along. That all the characters were supposed to represent different nations that were involved in this. So it was really a tribute to Balak that we had this cast where the characters were, you could really just, idolize a character, not because of their background or nationality or the color of their skin, but because they were great personalities. And I think that's what made the show so appealing to a lot of people, is that they were people. They were real people, as opposed to, idolized. I mean, we see that too much today, where we watch a show and you go, yeah, they had to put that character in because they needed to tick off a box.
Right.
And it detracts from the drama, because you sort of look at the character and go, yeah, that really was not necessary to the story.
But it really comes through, though, Dave, in Breakaway and in the other episodes too. But especially in Breakaway, you really have that feeling that it is a functional moon base, that it is an international moon base, and there are so many different components of it. It is widespread, and it just has that. There's that aura, that feel, that atmosphere. I can't even put it into words. It's almost like something. It's almost like something that you can't even describe. But
there's a hopeful atmosphere, because you've got this group of divergent people from different nations and backgrounds who are all working together. I mean,
sure.
Belak did build in a bit more interpersonal conflict into the show than was really shown. I think that probably was one of the reasons why Jerry and him didn't get along, because Jerry never really, characterizations were not really Jerry's strong suit. He was into the visual look of the show and the story. The characters were just there to take the story along. And it's part and parcel to the appeal of Jerry's shows, is that you have this, anybody could get into the characters, but it does, hold the writers back when all the conflicts got to come from outside. I mean, it's very common now that people are talking about how Gene Roddenberry pushed the writers down on Star Trek: The Next Generation and said Starfleet personnel do not have conflict.
Right.
which kind of makes them not really people.
Right.
You're going to have conflict. You don't like the way somebody eats. You don't like the way they breathe, something like that. Just something annoys you for no particular reason. And we saw a bit more of this conflict in series 2, because some of those series 2 stories came from a lot of early stories that were pitched for series 1 that they just didn't use.
Chris just brought up a really interesting point about the Italian co-production aspect of Space 1999. When did RAI, the Italian broadcaster, at what point did they come into the process to say we're going to co-finance this with?
I think they came in at the process around the time the Landaus were brought in, because when the show went from half hour to an hour, and the budget went way up, I think they needed to bring RAI in to, finance the back end of the show. I mean, it was, for a syndicated show, it was extremely expensive. I mean, they had hopes right from the start by bringing the Landaus in, they were going to get a network deal, sell this to prime time. ITC had some success with a lot of their shows as summer replacements. During the 60s, it was common for shows like Secret Agent, The Saint, well, not The Saint, but Prisoner Champions were brought in instead of, if a show was weak and they weren't going to run it again all summer long, they bring in something new, because, again, very different today, where you had specific times a year where you were trying to really get ad revenue up. You had what we'll call the November and February sweeps, where all shows put out the best. You had the big mini series, because that's where they got the advertising revenue. And just like Saturday nights were big TV night, summer was not a throwaway time either. Mm-hmm. But they knew that based on their habit of starting shows in either September or January, by summer they're into reruns. And people don't watch reruns as much because they've seen it already. So they would bring in these replacements to take the weaker shows off the air. And ITC figured, okay, if we have something really splashy, the networks are going to want to buy it. And that's where the big money is, because America was at the time the source of the big revenue. Right. That's not true anymore, but that was the case.
It was a different time, though, and
totally
with cable and the satellites and the way things are done now. I mean, back in the day, television episodes, for them to go 24 episodes, that was pretty much the norm. And there were even shows. I mean, I think of Star Trek, first season 29, Lost in Space. I think in the second year they did 30 episodes. But for now, I mean, the way, if you get 8 episodes out of a show that's being run for a first, for a season, it's almost like it's considered a lot, or I should say maybe like with 10 with the new Star Trek incarnation.
Yeah. I mean, the advantage of 10 episodes is you put your 10 strongest stories forward.
Sure.
You're not, the biggest problem with any show is it's an eating machine. Yeah. Once you get the ball rolling, you have to have something before the cameras. And sometimes you end up with a script that no matter how much you try and massage it, it goes before the camera is not ready.
Right.
Because you can't have people sitting idle. Now, with Space 1999, the original idea was we were going to start in November, December of 73 and get the show on the air by September 74. Mm. And this was partly or basically due to the fact that in Britain, the shows were shot in a 2-week interval, where in America, you would shoot the show in 6 days. So America could start a new season back then in July and get it on the air in September. But in England, they couldn't do that because of just the work week was different.
Right.
So when the show didn't get its September 74 premiere, they still went into production. And one of the things this allowed them to do is go back and fix things with episodes that weren't working. Mm. So in a lot of cases, they did a lot of reshoots.
Yeah.
And they would do pickups. I mean, Last Enemy is one of the shows that came in under time. It just was moving too fast, and they had to go back and shoot additional scenes just to pad it out.
I always get a smile when I see Dione, because you can see with Carolyn
Yeah.
Mortimer, her hairstyle is different throughout the episode. One, she's got bangs at one time, and then another time, her hair is longer. And Last Enemy, I believe, wasn't that the last episode that they actually shot? I think it was in March of '75 when they did the pickups, or
The pickups. Yeah.
I think
They did some pickup. The whole end sequence with the robot controlled moon buggy and the empty spacesuit was one of the last things they shot.
Wow.
That shot of the helmet falling off, which they just shot against a black background. They didn't have to build a set for that.
Space Brain, they did a lot of reworking with that episode.
Yeah.
In fact, if I remember correctly, there was scenes that part of the cast, Carla Romanelli, she wasn't even present when they actually did some of the reworking, because they did some changes with that. You brought up, of course, we're talking about Breakaway today. Breakaway, the changes that were done with that, and where 1 minute Koenig is flying, as you said, in the Eagle, and he's hit the collar on his suit is
collar changes,
and then it's corrugated in the next scene. So I mean, there's a lot of that going on too.
Yeah. I mean, there was a lot of that moving around. They, the advantage to the pilot, and it was built into shooting Breakaway. I mean, it's not fair calling it a pilot, because there really was never a pilot for the show. They just basically hit the ground running and started shooting. That was
the intro, yeah.
Right. They essentially gave the first episode additional time for shooting, because they knew they would have to figure out how to shoot things. I mean, one of the main reasons that main mission was the set was abandoned for the second season was it was a monster to shoot on, because it was so big. Camera angles were tough. They constantly had to pull set walls down to bring a crane in to shoot the camera from a crane. That's one of the reasons why we lose the staircase around the windows, because that wall was the one that was pulled out the most, and it was much easier once they got rid of the staircase.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge to light that set as well.
Always because of the size of it.
Now that was the only permanent set that was standing, that and the Eagle, right? For the two
main mission, Koenig's office, and the Eagles. And the Eagle wasn't really what we call a standing set, because that moved. It was on wheels.
Right.
Sometimes they would move the whole set onto the stage where they shot the planet exteriors, so they could show you walking out.
Yep.
They frequently used a section between the two stages, which was like an alleyway, an enclosed alleyway. And a lot of times they put it in there as well, because it was a long set, just because they ran out of room. So it always moved around. But the best thing that I liked about the fact that it was the only standing sets was you had, 5, 6 different rooms in medical center, from intensive care to diagnostic to whatever. So it gave the whole moon base this big sense to it. Once you got to the second season, it was like episode going, they changed that room in that corridor, but it's the same corridor,
right?
This door leads there. It just it was necessary to shoot the show at a faster pace, because
they had everything established. And one of the things that it was great at the time was when Tim Held's book, The Making of Space 1999, came out. There's a section in there where they actually show the schematic of the standing sets for year 2. So when you're watching the episodes and you're watching it at different places, and as they're going down the corridors, you can envision exactly where they are at. And to your point,
it's a dead giveaway.
It is, and they may have it set up where they have signs saying it's actually one thing, but in actuality, just based on the sets and the formations, and having seen the episodes as many times as we all have, exactly where they're at, and it just kind of took away from the scope of the moon base. Whereas in the first season, it just really felt massive. It really
made it more claustrophobic, which and this goes back to what I was saying about the shooting schedule. They started shooting the show. They were originally supposed to start shooting in 75, but they ended up in February 76. And even shooting in February, they were running late, and they had to double up episodes to get it on the air. It was a problem. So they had to have a set where they could shoot and shoot quickly. So the lighting was never changed. It wasn't like, in the first season, you'd have suddenly different colored panels to set the mood and stuff. And here it was, the only change you got was sometimes the lights would be dim because, some disaster happened. But most of the time, the camera was in the same position all the time. You only had 3 walls on Command Center.
It's funny you're mentioning that about the background of the lighting in Main Mission, because at one point, probably about maybe 15 or 20 years ago, I went through in production order with the episodes and actually listed the colors that they used and how it changed throughout the season and how it was consistent with the different colors. And it's kind of cool that they actually took the time to do that, because that's just it gave to the aesthetic of Main Mission.
Well, that was the other thing that was really made the first season so cinematic, was the fact that they had the time to do crazy camera angles and lighting and use different lenses. It wasn't regular television. It was movie of the week.
Yeah.
And even on episodes that were budget saving episodes like Force of Life, they spent the time to give you the really good moody camera angles to do that old dark house look.
David Tomlin's direction for that episode was incredible. I mean, right from the beginning,
Troubled Spirit was, the Hammer horror episode.
Yeah.
So it just shows you that there is real filmmaking into it. And all these years later, I think I have a better appreciation for Breakaway now than I did originally, because I always felt that the weakest episodes really were the first episodes of most of the Anderson shows, because they were so concentrated on filling in the format, introducing the vehicles and whatever. You go through like the UFO pilot, it's like we have to show every vehicle to show you what things do. That was just the way Jerry wanted to do it. I mean, even Zero G sets up the story without the characters are very two-dimensional, and only the commander and the professor have names. Everybody else is just the controller, the doctor, whatever. They didn't even make any effort to establish the characters, even describe them in the script.
Wow.
That was just really what they always did. So you give a real kudos to George Ballack. I mean, and there were things in the script that in his Bible for the show that were never visualized. I mean, I thought one of the biggest mistakes that they ever did was they didn't ever bother to do the automat, the lunch area where people would eat,
right?
Which plays a major scene in David Weir's original Black Sun script. It just places where people could gather instead of just hanging out in someone's room, I think is much better. So,
and it would have made sense to have like a commissary or an area, especially on the moon base, something that extensive where that would take place. So it is almost like a missed opportunity with that.
Yeah, I mean, I could see the logic and why they got rid of it, because one of the major production problems would have been how to come up with food.
Right.
What kind of we've known in passing that they have some kind of protein processing plant, and maybe they're doing vegetables and stuff.
Yeah, hydroponics and
whatnot. Right, hydroponics. So okay, we just see people eating salads and tofu. I don't know. Not like what was it in 2001 where they were eating baby food.
Right.
Which they probably would have done because they were trying to take a lot of lessons from 2001 anyway.
Right.
Or colored pieces of sponge, like in Star Trek: The Original Series.
Right. Yeah.
Play-Doh.
But it definitely would have, I think, taxed, Keith Wilson's department trying to dress the set with food. So I could kind of see why, but it just I kind of liked when the guys did the new version of the tech manual. We talked about it, and they came up with sort of like a lunch area, feeding, and it's like it was a beautiful looking set. I mean, I don't know if that was Keith Wilson would have came up with something that nice, but it would have been a nice area, just like 10 Forward is in Next Generation.
Right.
But Keith Wilson was really brilliant with his modular design.
Oh, the modular designs were just so terrific.
It's really practical for filmmaking as well to think about. Oh, you can just take them apart like Lego bricks and rearrange them and make them different.
Right. Put a panel in this wall or put a monitor or something, and it doesn't look, because how many times do you look at some other shows and you go, yeah, that wall was from this episode,
right?
Because they just put in a single wall.
Right.
So there was some, between Keith's designs and Brian's visual effects, because Brian had so much more time to do the visual effects. I mean, they started probably like a month or two earlier on the visual effects. I mean, there was a great time of doing test shots before they did, because we've seen shots of the Eagle where it hasn't even been labeled or dirtied down yet, where they're just doing lighting tests just to see what works. And he certainly had a lot more time to experiment in the first series than he did in the second.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not putting down the second to anyone who loves it. I mean, there are a lot of people out there that really enjoy the second series. It's just that the first has grown on me more and more every year. Hi, Mark. How you doing? It just because of I see so many things, and doing the book, especially, we had the real pleasure of working with Chris Penfold, who we sorely miss now. He just would, whatever we could pull from him, because, so long ago, and he's done so much since, trying to remember things. He just remembers the whole thing being such a whirlwind of rewrites that by episode 20, he had to bow out because he was just so burned out. He would work every day rewriting multiple scripts, working with other writers, and then he would tell us, like, on evenings or weekends, he'd go to the Landaus and sit with them and work on concepts.
Wow.
So
it was constant. It was always going and
never ending, because, as I said, it's a beast you have to feed, and you have to please all these masters.
Sure.
Yeah. And when you have someone like Lee Katzin, would Chris have had a lot of interaction with him directing the episode?
I don't think so. I don't think they were actually on the set as much as they would have liked. They were so busy at their typewriters and, getting scripts out. So it was a nightmare, but this is what TV is. I mean, you talk to anybody who's worked, especially at the beginning of a series, until shows get a handle on where they want to be. They're constantly in turmoil, especially at the beginning.
You're trying to essentially make sure you're trying to develop the characters, you're trying to develop the feel of the show, and it's a progression. And I mean, we've seen it in other shows as well. Again, we're referring to Star Trek. I mean, that's huge. I mean, if you watch those earlier first season episodes, those characters are in the process of developing, and then as it gets deeper into the season, they pretty much have more of a handle on it.
The actors are finding their way as well. They don't know they don't know what their characters are. Some walk in and go, I'm going to play it this way. I mean, Barry Morse had real defined ideas. He decided early on, simply because the character hadn't been fleshed out, that he'd come up with his own ideas for the character. But that's the kind of actor he was. He prepped into it. Others would go in, and sometimes they'd end up playing themselves, because this is how things fit in.
Right.
So, like Next Generation took 2 seasons before it hit its stride. It actually started hitting its stride in the latter half of the first and second seasons.
Yeah.
But
and then the other thing too is, with the second season, you had the writer's strike of 1988 going on. So they were utilizing scripts that had been developed for the show that was potentially going to be
phase 2.
Phase 2 before Star Trek the Motion Picture.
And they could only change names. They couldn't do major rewrites because the union wouldn't allow them. But and the other thing with Space 1999 was, you had Chris Penfold would write a script, or Johnny Byrne, or any of the other writers, and then the script would go through Jeffrey Anderson. It would go through, and then it would have to go to the United States to go through Abe Mandel. It would probably go through David Withers at ITC in London. So everybody would have their finger in the pie. And when you're dealing with, back then, it wasn't email. It was sometimes you would telex something, but in most cases you would send the script over by courier. So that would get there in a day or two. So a week later you might get notes back. Or in some cases, the story that I got from Bob Mandel, Abe Mandel's son, was his father saw an early print of Black Sun and essentially just called Jerry and said, never do something like that again.
Wow.
Because he just thought it was way too metaphysical.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that process of having a lot more fingers in the pie helped or hurt the show more?
It goes both ways. Sometimes it helps, sometimes it doesn't. But,
Right.
You have, for example, Jerry had his own vision of the show. And Jerry, I think, would have been very happy if the show was real hard science fiction. Abe Mandel saw the show as Flash Gordon, which is why you ended up with the second series the way it was, because he thought it should be Monster of the Week. That's what he grew up with. He grew up with, Flash Gordon, The Outer Limits, Buck Rogers. That's how he saw science fiction. And back then, with not having the internet or something, you could only rely on what were called test audiences. But you don't get a test audience like if you take your pilot to Comic-Con.
Yeah.
You get a bunch of people in a room, which is like a whole different audience. And you're going to get people who love science fiction, people who hate science fiction. Yeah. People who think science fiction is, Flash Gordon. People who think science fiction is Arthur C. Clarke.
Right. Well, you know what? You're bringing up a good point too, David, because in a lot of ways, if the technology existed then that existed today, it potentially could have helped things speed along. However, on the flip side of it, the show would not be the show that we have today, because it probably wouldn't have been allowed to develop the way it did because of the technology would have also went against it. So we're probably lucky that everything kind of like played out the way it did. But it is unfortunate, though, that it's almost like, what do they say? Too many cooks spoils the broth.
Sure. There's an old Hollywood adage that you can tell at the beginning of a movie the quality of the story by how many writers are involved.
Yeah.
But also the fact we know that in some cases a lot of writers don't get credit.
Right.
Yes.
So no great arts committee, but sometimes something manages to get through. It all depends on what the committee's made from.
Right.
So
sometimes that committee can create a really strange alchemy. It's like a great band where they're all really great at specific things. And if those things happen to mix well, it's like the ingredients in a really good cake.
I mean, could year one have been better? Maybe. It certainly could have been worse.
Right.
But in some cases, what happened to the show worked for it. I mean, certainly losing the network sale early on allowed them to go back and touch up episodes.
Sure.
They had the time to do things, but even though it was an expensive show, there was a budget crunch every week. So there were a lot of stuff that had to be cut out because they couldn't afford to do it, couldn't figure out how to do it. Episodes like Space Brain were created because Brian Johnson said, "We got this effect. We could do this. We got this foam. Let's write an episode around it." And that's how some things happen, because somebody
the foam.
Right. You can do a special effect, so they do it, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And Chris Penfold was the first to admit that episode did not work. And there was a lot of finagling to get it to at least be passable. And yet talking to someone like John Kenneth Muir,
he says that's one of his favorite episodes.
Hey,
it's amazing how that can still, have a big impact.
Bob and I had a long talk when we first, started to work together. That when I read his first book, Destination Moonbase Alpha, I kind of was upset with the book because so many of the episodes that he hated, I liked. And I was like, I really always thought Space Warp was one of the good episodes, which is why I used it in Cosmic Princess, because I thought it was a really good action-packed episode. It moved along. Right. And then he goes, well, but look at the story. And I'm going, yeah, you're kind of taking the mickey out of it. You're pointing out things that I really didn't want to look at.
Yeah, exactly.
You love the effects in that is an effect of extravaganza. I mean,
we for those who were at the convention who saw the reconstructed extended Breakaway, these were a lot of the elements that were in the original shooting scripts that were cut out because there was a lot of reshuffling because it's a bit slow, admittedly, but it fleshes out the characters and the story so much more. I mean, when you read Belek's first draft, it's really a very well written story. For those who bristle at the animosity between Koenig and Russell in the Big Finish audio adaptation, that's really in the first script. She is extremely suspicious of him. She thinks he's a company man. And he's just there to, essentially, pave over all that's going on and make Gorski look like, the good guy, when in fact Gorski is just a really nasty guy, because she shot him down when he showed that he was interested in her.
Right.
Warren, can you talk a little bit about the process
to have? I'm sorry.
Warren, can you talk a little bit about the process of creating that extended edition of Breakaway and how you did that?
Yeah, for sure, Ben. Thanks. And I was actually going to bring up the fact that Breakaway, more than any other episode, I mean, if we're talking about all this, could have been so much different than what we know. Yeah. And even considering the fact that, as David mentioned, with that year-long gap between 74 and 75, there were ideas in the works there, like a theatrical cut, that really could have happened had they known about that extra time, right? Yeah. And so much has been discovered in the last couple of years through the work that David and Bob did, and acquiring certain documents from the Martin Landau archives. It's interesting to note that Martin Landau himself was very hands-on with a lot of the decision making, right down to the final edit of Breakaway, and the letter we found, Dave, saying it was at one point 72 minutes, and he wanted it cut down to 52 minutes to better ensure that network sale. Mm-hmm. Right. So he was against the idea, but there again, and too many cooks, we talked about it, but there was an agenda to actually take Breakaway theatrical, because the extra scenes were there, and the extra scenes themselves, I found really interesting diving into those, because they did provide a little more characterization, and even Gorski's reference to Lee Russell, I thought mm-hmm. was fascinating, because they were also, it shows they were originally trying to sort of build like an in-universe story arc, right? I think on some levels. So yeah, no, and Ben, to answer your question, the new edits were based on the original scripts that David had again, and the lost audio clips that Simon Rhodes and Dave Sisson originally discovered about 15 years ago. So, but it was sort of our task to reinsert those lost scenes into the episode. That was our very first step. I think Roy and David remember that first example of that when you listen to it for the first time. It was really, really amazing. It was really fascinating.
The important thing to point out is contrary to a lot of the rumors that went around, there never was a script written for a 90-minute or 2-hour pilot. All the scripts are still structured as 4 acts for a 1-hour thing. And like a lot of shows, the writer tries to write a script around the idea that certain number of pages are going to take a certain amount of time to shoot. And when we get to the actual script that's labeled shooting script, turning point, it actually has timings for each scene. And if you go in and I took a sequence in our book and I said, okay, if I add up this sequence, it comes out to say 2 minutes with all the visual effects based on what they're doing. But if you go to the episode, you find the timing is completely different. And that's either because the visual effect ran long or ran short, or the scene is cut closer. So it's all guesswork when they time something out and say, okay, this should work for 50 minutes. But then when they do the final cut, they find, whoa, we got 72 minutes when we put it all together. Now we got to shave it down.
Yeah.
So the idea was, do we take the 72-minute version, show it, sell it as a 90-minute pilot, fill it in with additional footage? Some of these ideas could have been passed around, may not have been memorialized in memos, but I think there was a lot of discussion. What do we do with this episode? It's come out long. Do we leave it? Do we beef it up? Do we cut it down?
Yeah. But it was interesting to finally put an end to the old urban myth and rumor that there was that 90-minute
Yes.
or 2-hour version. It was never anywhere close to that. And even when you go through the script, right? Yeah, you're right, Dave. I mean, there's clearly not enough content there to fill a 90-minute or 2-hour presentation.
So, it does just show that this is how a lot of stuff works. I mean, we've talked about Last Enemy running short. They had to shoot additional footage. And there are a lot of episodes we know from this episode sequences that there are scenes that never made it into the final episode, visual effects that never made it, because the episodes ran long. And you have a set time of I think there were about 52 minutes and 30 seconds roughly, for what was the standard commercial length for a network show. But we all know that when the show went into syndication, they were cut down by as much as 6 minutes.
Yeah.
For local stations. I mean, I could still point out in a lot of episodes scenes that were always missing when they were run here in New York.
Well, that's very interesting too, because when growing up, we lived right outside of New York City. So Channel 11 WPIX was the go-to for watching Space 1999. And then for the second series in later 76, we moved out closer to Pennsylvania, close to Pennsylvania. So we had the Philadelphia station at the time, 17, that was carrying 1999. And it would be interesting because 17 would have footage that 11 didn't have, and then vice versa. And then I was exposed to that, and I was like, wow, look at all this extra footage that I didn't even know existed, unless I saw it in the novelizations too, because some of that would be notated in there. So it was almost like, it was like bonus sequences that I was privy to because of being able to watch it on another station.
Well, what would happen with the show was, once it went into syndication, the idea was everybody gets the first episode. So if they sold the show to 100 stations, that would be probably about 100 prints of the first episode. Some stations like Channel 11 would run it in 35 millimeter, so they would get a 35 mil print. Small local stations would get a 16 mil print. Now, after the first episode, the reason why some people might see Matter of Life and Death as episode 2, and some people see War Games as episode 2, is that they would send out maybe half the amount of prints, or even a third. And once Channel 11 finished their episode 2 broadcast, they would ship the print out to either ITC or the next station on a shipping list. And Channel 11 would do their own edits. And then they'd put the footage back in the print, ship it to the other station, who would then do their own edits. So I think I once saw, was it Beta Cloud? I saw it in Boston. And then when I went back to New York, I saw it in New York, and the edits were completely different.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I even remember you talking about that in Starlog a long time ago, David. About how you suddenly saw a version of War Games where Koenig's speech about God was included, and you'd never seen that before, right? And it gave you an entirely new perspective.
Well, Channel 11 left that in. I think other stations cut it out.
Maybe it's the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, the most notorious one was watching Beta Cloud, where you go to the act out where Tony and Maya were, I think, trapped in the room with the chlorophyll or whatever. I can't remember exactly the scene. But we came back from the commercial break and they're running down a corridor. We never saw them come out of the room. Because they should just be lazy and say, this is boring, let's cut it out.
Well, it's funny talking about this because with the Metamorph, and I was even just saying when we did the our kickoff episode, I actually to this day I have the original cassette tape. I was like 10 years old when I taped it in front of the TV, and when Channel 11 ran it, they also had their edits, and one of the scenes that was cut out was when they're putting the boosters onto the Eagle.
Yeah.
And then when Koenig meets up with Annette Fraser by the travel tube and says, "Don't worry, we'll get him back," and then she says, "Thank you," and they go into the travel tube and it goes off. All of that was cut off. When the Eagle takes, they enter the Eagle and then they're taking off. All of that was cut out. The scene goes right to where Koenig says, "Mentor, this is John Koenig," we're at rendezvous point.
Yeah.
And it was like that entire sequence was like not even visible, but again, I caught it when I watched it, out of Philadelphia on 17. It was like, wow, it's like.
I mean, I give Channel 11 props for the fact that they did, sensible edits. That there really was nothing that you didn't say, gee, I missed. I mean, I remember with Breakaway, there's the scene where, Koenig's mulling over things that have been told to him and you're hearing all the voiceovers.
Yep.
And Helena's line of, I can't guarantee they're going to be affected 3 days or 3 months out into deep space. That scene was cut.
Yeah.
And I'm like going, where did that line come from?
Right.
Yeah.
But to your point, it didn't, the edits that 11 did not impact the story. And at the end of the day, even though it's extra footage and it's characterization, what you don't want a story that's choppy. Like, you have one scene going on that leads right into another, and it's like, how did they actually get there? So there at least was thought put behind that, and it wasn't just like.
I mean, people have to remember too that we were used to stuff being edited. I mean, how many times did you watch a movie that was cut down for a 90-minute 4:30 movie slot?
Right, the 4:30 movie.
It's like, oh yeah, I saw this on the other channel, and suddenly it's in a 2-hour slot, and I'm seeing this whole other half of the movie.
Hey, boys, we're coming up to the top of the hour here. Ben and Dave, how are you doing for time? Like, do you think you could stick around for a little bit?
Yeah.
Would it be okay if we gave you guys a little 5 or 10 minute break and brought?
Yeah, I could use more coffee.
Special guests? Yeah. We did that.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks,
we'll catch up with you in a little bit then. Okay.
Sure.
Awesome.
Awesome discussion. Love
for sure. Roy. Very exciting. And one thing, and Roy and I, folks, we're going through at the beginning of the broadcast. We're winging a little bit of this ad-libbing, but we were trying to come up with a general format on how to introduce the shows. And one thing we didn't do, Roy, is introduce the guests. We sort of jumped into that. We should maybe take a couple minutes each episode and just introduce the guests and have 30 seconds from each of them. But Dave and Ben, thank you very much for your time. We'll catch up with you shortly here. So, Roy, we have a couple other guests in the background.
We do.
That we didn't announce, and we'll bring on as a special surprise here on our very first episode. So we will welcome. Wow, Tim and Craig.
Hey guys.
Guys, how's everybody
How
doing
you doing,
today?
gentlemen?
Good. How you doing? And we
Good.
should properly introduce Tim Ellis from Giant Leap Toys and Craig Owens from Zyka Toys. And for the folks out there that don't know about them, they are behind the launch, the Kickstarter that's taking place for Eagle 1976, which is definitely making a lot of important headway. A lot of exciting news coming out in regards to this. So welcome, guys. Great to have you on.
Thank you.
Doing some exciting news as of yesterday. Really, really pleased you guys could make it again today and to give everybody the latest updates on the project and the Kickstarter. So thanks again. Over to you guys.
Okay. Well, as far as you mentioned yesterday, our announcement that we're moving into tooling. So So with with a lot of the initial fundraising that we've been able to do on different platforms other than the Kickstarter, we've been able to pull together enough funds to get that going in earnest. So we're gonna have the factory start moving ahead and get the tooling underway. And it's a huge commitment. It's a big commitment to go ahead and take this step at this stage. But this is how much Anderson, how much Zyka, and how much Giant Leap believe in this project. So yeah, we're going forward, and this beauty right here will be a reality next year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, incredible.
Thumbs up, for sure.
Yeah, excited about it. This kind of looks like I can. It's almost big enough that I'm flying the thing.
One of the things I noted when you were on Roy's show here a couple of weeks ago, guys, was just the overall value in this product, right? I mean, because I've been a sort of a casual part-time collector of Eagles all my life, just like everybody else. But I mean, of course, about 10 years ago when the 22-inch MPC Around 2 kits first came out, I mean, that was amazing in and of itself. But I mean, in the back of a lot of people's minds, it's always been a big dream to own a 44-inch, right? But with no commercial kits in that size or scale available to this day, they're very expensive. I mean, if anything in a 44 inches, you're talking, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000.
Sure.
So the fact that this is real close. I mean, it's about 36 inches, 37.
Go ahead, Craig.
36 inches.
36, and for a matter of a few $100s. Again, it's just the overall value here. I think everybody should really consider that and get on board with that Kickstarter. And yeah, this could be your only opportunity to own something in this scale without breaking the bank, right?
Yeah. Well, we're going to do this initial run, and this will be the only opportunity to get this standard edition. On our Kickstarter, we're also offering up the retro Mattel edition that'll have the red engine housing back here and the black translucent canopy on the front, and then we're also we're doing an homage to Dinky, so we'll have our metallic pea soup green edition that we're doing. Which, when I was a kid, it was a head scratcher for me. There you go. Beautiful, Warren. That's great. When I was a kid, it was a head scratcher. I didn't really understand why the green for that and for the UFO and the scepter and everything. But over time and, getting a little bit older, a little bit more wistful for the youth and everything, the green has really grown on me. So I begged and pleaded with Craig that we get that option in there. And
oh yeah, absolutely. You know what? It was such a strange decision, because I think Dinky originally did it because they felt that an all white toy wouldn't appeal to kids, so they wanted to mix it up a little bit, and they did some in blue, some in green. But yeah, it's so ingrained in all things Eagle collecting. I think it's great that you guys are doing it.
Yeah. Well, I'll let Craig tell you a little bit about the process that we went through, because I was on Roy's last podcast. I was talking about the fact that we were really trying to strike a balance between what would be that, screen accurate 44-inch and what would be the 2.5-foot, Mattel version. Because the Mattel toy was the inspiration, for us getting into this project. So I'll let him tell you what we all went through.
Thanks, Tim.
You're welcome.
Well, yeah, basically we just started with the original Mattel design and worked from there. I looked at the screen used models and some of the model kits, some of the die cast, and just tried to find the best elements of all of those that could be mixed in with the retro aesthetics, but find that middle ground, that happy medium where it wasn't going to lean, too much one way or the other. And I think what we've come up with is kind of strikes that balance that I was hoping we could achieve with this. Because initially, this thing was actually much closer to looking like the Mattel toy, just larger. And then we started, looking at different, details that maybe, I think this could be added and not really, push it too far to the modern aesthetic or anything. And after a few minor additions here and there, this is what we ended up with. And we're really happy with how this has turned out. Very happy.
Well, I have to say, having had the opportunity, like Warren, to see it in person and up close and up front, it really, really is amazing what you've done. The level of detail with all the components of it. It's definitely a nod to the Mattel Eagle, but at the same point, it's taking it to the next level 50 years later. And it's going to be a very special item for, the folks to have that are fans of, whether it be the Mattel or the Eagle itself. And as Warren was saying too, it is probably about as close as you can get to the 44-inch without having to make that, hefty expense, because as we know that really, you're looking at $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 depending upon where you're actually, purchasing it, just because the market has changed. But one thing I do want to add too is that it's very important that if you have not actually jumped on board with this, as far as a consumer, make sure that you do, because as Tim was saying, as Craig has been saying too, that this is going to be the only opportunity that you're going to really have to do this, because this is not going to be marketed after this run. This is going to be once and done. And so now is the time to really jump on board in regards to this. And then next year you will be pleasantly happy having that in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, for sure. It really truly is the ultimate anniversary piece, guys. And I love the way that you and Anderson Entertainment have marketed this as the 50th anniversary prize possession. And of course, we're thrilled to have you guys. We're thrilled to have you guys in London as part of those 50th anniversary celebrations. And of course, moving forward as well. It's just a real pleasure to be a part of this, guys.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. We really have a lot of fondness for Space 1999, and especially for this Eagle. The design of the Eagle is just, iconic and has been with us since childhood. And so yeah, we appreciate any opportunity that we can get to talk it up to the fans and let them know that we're out there doing the work for them, and hopefully they'll join us and get on board with it. We're pretty pleased with the way things are going. Absolutely.
That's great news. Now, how many days are left now in regards to doing this?
Craig?
With Kickstarter?
Yeah.
20 some days. I haven't checked this morning. I think it's like 21, 20.
22 days. So it's
22 days. I know it was in 20.
22 days, 286 backers.
Excellent.
That's
wonderful. Oh, sorry. Didn't you guys have weren't you talking about some way that people can actually migrate over towards the end if things?
Right. So what's going to go on is we talked about this on Roy's podcast.
Yes.
Is, the Kickstarter campaign, for a number of various reasons, out of the gates, we thought that this was going to be the platform that would really solidify our e-commerce needs, right? And so, Anderson already has their store set up. They're going. We're also offering this through Big Bad Toy Store. They're up and going. So with the Kickstarter, we thought, this is where we can leverage against other e-com, right? But what we found out is that, there's some of the fan base who doesn't trust Kickstarter. There's some of the fan base that, maybe isn't even aware of Kickstarter or is intimidated by it, right? So what we're going to be doing, Craig has been working feverishly behind the scenes to get Zyka set up with an e-com store. And so we'll get to that 20 some odd day countdown with the Kickstarter, but we're going to start asking everyone who's pledged, those 286 that have pledged to the Kickstarter, to start migrating their orders from the Kickstarter over to the Zyka store. And the reason for that is it's going to give us a better cost break on our shipping. So we discovered that this other shipping outlet that we can go through that's going to give us a better cost for the fans. And then also it's going to allow us to extend our marketing and our reach for this up until the date that the factory needs to start production. So we're going to gain, well, we'll lose some time for Chinese New Year, right, between January and February. But we're going to gain a considerable amount of time as far as the marketing and promotion of this, just to ensure that we get it in as many hands as we can. Right. So that's going to be part of the migration notification that we'll be putting out there on the Kickstarter site. And then once we've informed all those 286 backers on the Kickstarter campaign, then we'll start to broadcast that a little more widely onto the Facebook pages, onto our Instagram pages, and things like that. So yeah, Craig has knocked it out of the park, working behind the scenes to make this e-com site come together. We did some test purchases yesterday. I'm now the proud owner of 50 different Eagles because I'm holding to that. When it comes to the e-com thing, and he's like, cancel your order, and I'm like, how do I do that? I don't know what I'm doing. So I'm a very poor partner in that regard. But yeah, we've been really thrilled with the response so far, and if anybody has any kinds of questions, any sort of concerns regarding the migration, we're here. You can get us on Facebook. You can get us through Instagram. You can reach Craig at zykatoys.com. You can reach me at zykatoys at Gmail, right, Craig? Right. .com, and you can get me at giantleaptoys@gmail.com. So feel free, reach out with any questions. Let us know what your concerns are, and we'll get them answered for sure. But yeah, good stuff happening, tooling moving forward, extending the marketing window of this. And what else, Craig? What else did I miss?
Who's looking after the daily memes? I'm sure getting a kick out of those. They're a lot of fun too, guys. That's Tim.
Yeah. Sorry. I have to say, I look forward in the morning or early afternoon. I'm seeing these ads coming through, and I was actually going to comment on the one because I saw the one photo from the Lambda Factor with Sally Martin, where she's like,
when you get hers, you get yours before she gets hers. Yeah.
So no, it's great that you guys are just so accessible with this, and folks can reach out. So it's a good time.
Gotcha. The other thing to mention about the migration, just for anyone who might have a concern about it, because what Kickstarter will do is it will hold your information. It will not charge your card until the Kickstarter is successful. So Craig has been able to set up our site that it will take your information and it will hold it exactly like the Kickstarter does. We are not going to be charging your card immediately for any of those funds. And so then once we start to get closer toward the production run, and we do need to access those funds and everything, then that's when we'll be sending out notification to the backers, then letting them know.
Tim,
yeah, go ahead.
That's actually not correct.
I'm sorry.
No, they'll be charged as soon as they place the order.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Or it might be like a hold, like it'll place a hold, Craig, and then.
No, you'll be charged for the full amount. Yeah, you will be charged. Yeah. And unfortunately, the e-commerce site I use doesn't have the option to do a pre-order like say Big Bad Toy Store would, or one of those larger companies who I think they do offer, where if you place an order, they don't charge you until they're actually ready to ship the order.
Okay.
So, but unfortunately, the way the site works that I use, that's not an option. It'll charge you right away. So, well, it's kind of like the Kickstarter. It's similar to the Kickstarter in that, like Tim said, when Kickstarter ends, if it's successful, you get charged for that. So right. The Kickstarter pulls your money right then. So it's basically the same type of a thing.
The same principle. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, like I said, I'm sorry for the misinformation, and I'll just stick to making memes from here on.
Yeah, you stick to that part.
Yeah. I'll do what I'm good at. You do what you're good at.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, boys, we'd like to thank you very much for your time. Anything else before we part ways today?
No.
I think of.
Just thank you again for the opportunity. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
On, and best of luck with this. Hope it goes well. Enjoyed the pilot episode and was listening in on the earlier conversation. I am now convinced that I am a know nothing when it comes to Space 1999. I do not have the fan base capacity that you experts do. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So,
and that's all Roy. I got to say, I mean, when it comes to trivia and things like that, boy, Roy is top of the class.
We're all fans, and
he's the quiz master.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, great. Thanks very much, guys. We'll certainly keep in touch over the next few weeks and hopefully get some more updates along the way. But best of luck with all things Eagle 1976. Okay.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Thanks again, guys. We'll talk soon.
Thank you again, guys. Take care.
Take care.
We'll see you.
See you.
Bye.
Well, and there we go. Very nice.
Absolutely. We got to bring Ben and Dave back too.
Yep. You betcha. You betcha. We'll get them back on here.
Hey, Ben. Hey, David.
Wow.
Hi.
Oh, I remember having that original Mattel one when it first came out.
Well, and it's interesting because they never sold them in Canada, so I think it was just a U.S. release.
Eileen Skidmore, who ran Nick Tate's fan club,
yes.
She wanted one so badly, I ended up sending mine to her.
Oh, really? That was nice.
Okay.
That was back when you could afford to send something like that overseas. Now I can't even afford to send a CD overseas to Canada. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It really, really is. Hey, boys, listen, we said when we put you on a little break there that we didn't actually introduce you guys. You want to give 30 seconds each, give us a little history on who you are, what you're all about, and your involvement in all things Space 1999.
Well, David can definitely take 15 of my seconds because he's got a much longer resume than I do.
No.
But most people might know me for my work. You want to go first, David? Go ahead.
No, you go first.
All right, I'll go first. Most people know me I do a lot of different things related to puppetry, but I also freelance for Anderson Entertainment. So I was a producer on the Jerry Anderson podcast, and podcasting and Jerry Anderson, both things that are very near and dear to my heart. So I'm excited to be part of this show today.
For sure.
And
Ben's going to serve as our producer as well.
Absolutely.
We thank you for your time there as well.
Thanks, Ben.
I just write books and print CDs. That's all. No, I started out working for Starlog magazine, which I just happened to fall into, and because I knew all things Jerry Anderson back then, and nobody else knew it. I got to write the Alpha Tech notebook. And that got me over to England to meet Jerry Anderson, and things kind of snowballed for about 5.5 years, working on some projects with him. Eventually, now I've written, 2 more books with Robert Wood and Chris Penfold, and a couple of other projects for Anderson as well. So I'm just amazed where things are right now with the show, because I remember the 80s and early 90s where nobody knew anything about the show.
There was a definite drop off there, and now it's seen a resurgence.
I used to have a whole bunch of props and stuff that I got through Phil Ray, and most of the stuff I sold off because nobody knew it, and it just collected dust. It wasn't like I could take it around and show it. I did sell it to buy a Thunderbirds puppet, which I have, but again, now nobody knows what Thunderbirds is.
Should have hung on to that Space 1999 stuff, eh?
Yeah, some I wish. When I looked at the Greg Jean auction, I was a little heartbroken that there was a lot of stuff he got from me, and I think I was more heartbroken to the fact that the stuff had deteriorated so badly, that either it wasn't cared for or whatever happened since Greg passed, but it definitely looked worse for wear than when I had it. Because I had the baby Gwent, I had the spacesuit and everything in the backpack.
That was
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I'm sorry. That was John Koenig's suit that you had, right?
No, the suit was Barbara Baines because I actually was able to get into it. But the problem was you couldn't lift your arms up higher than this because of the size of it. But they were all made to be so baggy that anybody could wear them. The helmet was Koenig's from which one was it? The camera helmet from
the AB Chrysalis.
AB Chrysalis.
Yeah.
And it wasn't in very good shape when it came in, and Ed Marecki fixed it up. So that's why it's got a lot of the black patching on it that was standard to the regular ones, because we just thought it looked a little weak without it for display.
Right.
The backpack, the rocket backpack was mine. And there's a bunch of other little satellites and stuff. I used to have the space dock, which was tremendous once you put it together. That was one of the ones that I just couldn't keep because it ended up sitting most of the time in a box because it was like 6 feet across when you put it together.
Amazing.
Yeah. Thankfully, though, I was going to say, nowadays we are very grateful to the majority of people who do own the original props.
Yes.
In looking after them and in some cases restoring them, and we had an awesome exhibition just last month again in London with from all the fellows over there, and a big kudos to everybody out there.
Especially the guys who will bring the stuff out to show, not the ones that hide it.
Yes, exactly.
We know that's the case now with Eagle One, that it's missing because it's gone to a collector that's not even revealing his identity. Which is a shame because it's like disappearing into a black hole. So is a little Greg Jean stuff disappearing into a black hole. We got Darren Peters to bring Eagle 3 to Calgary, which was terrific.
Andrew Frampton with Eagle 2. You got London.
Yeah, that I was sorry to not. That's the only Eagle. Well, actually, I've seen them all in person because Jerry had them in his office at home, his home office years ago. And he was going to loan us one of them for the Springfield convention in '82. But then Phil Ray essentially got everything to hold on to, and Phil brought it over. He brought us Eagle 1. He brought us the 22-inch, which is now in the hands of the Catacombs, and I have Eagle 11. So we at least know where 2 of the original Space Models Eagles are now,
which is pretty cool.
and that was fascinating as well. And I didn't realize, but I think it was Chris Trice that actually brought a couple of the original builders from Space Models to London. Yeah.
I had one of the buildings, and that went to a collector, and he sold it off to somebody. The buildings were kind of weird because when you look at them from the top was all kinds of very obvious, bits and pieces that weren't meant to be seen from that angle because they were always shot from ground level. So you'd see like Gillette disposable razors with the word Gillette on it, or the
not the buildings, but the builders. Like I think the buildings are owned by Andrew Frampton, Jim Winch, but Chris brought a couple of the original builders of the 44.
Oh yes. The guys from Space Models. In fact, I hooked up with them on Facebook because I told them I have the 11-inch, which they probably built.
That's right.
Amazing.
So then I shared that information with Jeffrey Morris. So, he knows for the documentary who the original builders are.
Yeah, for sure.
Amazing.
Yeah, and after all, like you said, after all this time, there's just so much more that we're learning and discovering each and every day. We should be very thankful, and all those incredible documents that Bob got from the Landau estate. Basically documenting every step of the production and Martin and Barbara's time in the series was just fascinating to go through.
It was by far no means complete. I had to guess on a few things. When I set up the timeline for the book, but it's fascinating when you see how a show is put together. It's such a puzzle.
Absolutely.
And those two main binders, just so everybody knows, they were of course sold at auction in London. They ended up in the hands of a fellow you may know named Martin Willie. So they've definitely ended up in a good home. Just so everybody knows, everything has been scanned fully in high quality, and all those documents will be available eventually. So we'll all have access to them.
It's wonderful.
So good.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get another book out at some point. I know a couple of people are working on one person's working on a book, people reminiscing about the show and its effect on them, and someone else is doing well, I don't want to say yet because they haven't announced it, and then someone else is doing a translation of a foreign novel for English. So
a lot of good stuff.
Very exciting time
that are being worked, and I know Anderson has expressed interest in Rob and I providing another book, but I don't want to just, push something out for nothing. We pitched
a lot of work to make a book.
Well, yeah, and we pitched a couple of ideas to them, including we'd love to do a revised edition of our books, because there are some things that came out after the books were published, and couple of little errors, that you miss no matter how many times you read things. Yeah. I know.
Hey, we're just happy that you guys did those books. So
I still haven't lived out Planet M in the first tech manual.
Planet M.
Yeah, it was supposed to be Planet D. It's Planet M.
Oh, for Brian the Brain.
Planet M. Yeah, it was like, I thought one thing and nobody caught it,
No, it's amazing. We even dropped a little teaser trailer there last month for something called Return to Moonbase Alpha that we might be hopefully developing over the next year for the 50th anniversary.
Yeah.
It's
a great time to be a fan.
It really is. It's an exciting time with all things Space 1999, and like you were saying earlier too, Dave. Back in the 80s and even the 90s, not at least until around the late 90s, it was like a dark time. And I remember when the show was pulled off of the stations, and there was an article I think it was in Starlog, and maybe I think you probably even had written it, that in regards to the rights, it would be maybe, and this is probably like in the late 70s, maybe 80, 81, that we'd have to wait until at least 1984 for the rights to be, opened up, because as far as being able to syndicate the show, because it was only 2 seasons. So networks didn't really want to, or not networks, but the stations didn't really want to show it like they would show Star Trek or some of the other shows that were 3 seasons or more.
Right.
And there was no DVDs. There was the VHSs that came out. There were only the 4 episodes. And then there was the Columbia House that we were happened to have, I think, and that was in the 90s. So fast forward to where we are today, we really are very fortunate to have all this access, whether it be the internet or the DVDs, the Blu-rays, and we've definitely come a long way.
Well, it shows everywhere now. It's on a lot of different streaming platforms.
Right.
So that's great.
But back then, I mean, we were only fortunate to have like cassette tapes if you tape recorded the episodes, and just to be able to
But so many people never caught it because the reason it was syndicated, so they weren't aware of the show.
Right.
You mentioned Martin Landau and Barbara Bain, and they say Mission Impossible.
Right.
That was all they would remember.
Yeah.
I think probably just around the time of Star Wars came out, it was like a forgotten show.
Yeah. Well, I have to say, I was at Schiller Theater yesterday for a few hours in New Jersey, and Barbara Bain was there. And Space 1999 is definitely remembered, as well as Mission Impossible. There were a lot of fans. She had a very long line of people, and she's looking great. And God bless her at 93 years old.
Yeah.
But it was very great, very good to see her there, and the fans were there, so it's pretty cool.
That is really great.
Yeah.
We actually we hope we're going to see her for her next birthday, Roy. Right?
Absolutely. That'll next year.
Next September in Los Angeles.
No, she won't have far to travel this time.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're hopeful. So, yeah. But you know what? Even insofar as like a lot of later shows, like throughout the 80s and 90s, that were maybe edited on videotape, we're so fortunate because I mean, you're not going to see high definition versions of TV series like that. The Blu-rays that we have and the potential to maybe even do a 4K release, you know, it's just it's astounding when you think of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a real shame that that network went under because they probably would have done a 4K eventually. I know it wasn't really on their plate right now because of the cost of what they were doing, but you know, I was fortunate that they did, you know, the Super Space Theater movies that they did. I wish they had gotten around to doing the whole set, but that's probably not going to happen now. I only just was able to actually finally snag a copy of Super Colorization, which was their last release. So it's at least the ultimate set's now available through Spirit Entertainment.
That's good.
Yeah,
that features the TV, that features the SSD movies, and some of the other bits. All the stuff we did for the Super Space Theater package is in there.
Cool.
Yeah, and then now Fanderson is doing the soundtracks. So far we've got Alien Attack and Destination Moonbase Alpha, and they hope to do the whole series as well.
Very nice.
So now you could hear the music all chopped up.
The way it was meant to be heard.
Right, right.
But you know what?
With the Oliver Onions song.
Yes.
Everyone loves the Oliver Onions song. Yay.
But you know what? Love them or hate them. I mean, we were talking about that lull in the 80s, and if people out there weren't aware, it was primarily David Hirsch that spearheaded that campaign to cut those episodes together, so that you know, space was still seen at that time, right?
Because they couldn't. There was no interest in syndicating the show.
Yeah.
So the only avenue available to ITC was cable television, because you know you had home box office and Showtime and Cinemax starting up, and they were hungry for product because they couldn't depend on theatrical features.
Right.
And they snapped up, you know, HBO snapped up, I think it was Thunderbirds to the Rescue, and then the rest went to Showtime or Cinemax. And, you know, we got some mileage out of that. And those were the first things that were released on video cassette in England. And a lot of people who are really, you know, involved now with the shows, like oh God, I'm forgetting his name. So, Chris Drake, he will kill me. But you know, they remember the TV movies first because they were the first things that were put out before they started putting episodes out.
Well, it's interesting too, David. You're mentioning about putting the two episodes together. I remember WPIX during the first season of 1999 doing a special presentation of Breakaway and War Games that they showed the two episodes back to back.
Yeah.
And I just have this, and I think it was like in the middle of the week too, and they did this.
Yeah, like a Wednesday. Yeah. Well, they did the same thing with Bringers of Wonder. They ran it as a 2-hour episode, and they cut the recap and everything from the second episode, so it played right into it.
Yeah,
which was tough to do back then because they didn't have the footage without all the credits. Because I remember when we did the TV movies, we had to special order all the sequences that had credits on them without any overlays.
Okay,
so we can do cuts like that.
Right. Otherwise, in the second half of the hour, suddenly you see credits start to pop up again, right?
Yeah. Which you see, sometimes the networks do that. If they run, you know, the first two episodes of a show, they cut off the end title, but they still run the main title.
Right.
And then they throw all the credits on at the back end.
You know, and you're mentioning this too, and this is a point I was going to bring up earlier in regards to, we were talking about Breakaway as a theatrical release back in the day, and you know how it didn't happen. But immediately what comes to mind is I was a huge Battlestar Galactica fan. Battlestar Galactica in 1978 was run in the theaters as the movie, and then they did the one time I think it was in September of '78 when they premiered it on ABC. They ran it straight through as the movie, and then later on they would do the individual episodes. Buck Rogers, the same thing, theatrical version,
Right.
and then what they did was they brought it on.
They cut them both ways, but
Yeah.
no. Well, with Galactica, the movie was run in Canada. In America, we didn't get the movie until after the show was on the air.
Yeah,
It was actually in theaters in Canada. It was
yes, because there were some people that went to Canada to see the movie.
I saw it in the theater.
Yeah, no, I mean from America.
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
Because we got letters, at Starlog, and I think Ed Marecki went to Canada with some people from Massachusetts to see it. Yeah. So they got it first. I was at the New York premiere of Buck Rogers because Peter Mosen, who worked for us at Starlog, had made a Cylon costume, and he was doing some promotion for Universal, and they had him, even though it was Buck Rogers, they had him out front of the theater where we went the movie, and I went there to help him and his girlfriend out, who had a Daggett costume, and we sat in the front row off to the right side to see the movie, and we were like watching it like this. Oh yeah, there's the ship going slightly sideways and skewed up, the worst possible place. But you remember these things.
Yep.
Great memories.
And I got to see Mission Galactica: The Cylon Attack in London.
Oh, and that was the Living Legend Part 1 and Part 2 put together,
right?
Wasn't it?
Because that was not shown here until years later.
Yes, after
I think on the video release or something. But yeah, I mean, turning TV episodes into movies was normal for European distribution, and in countries that didn't have a lot of TV stations. ITC did that with a lot of shows. The SST movies were by no means the first.
Right.
One of the most famous ones is the 2-color Secret Agent episodes that became Kuroshi. And and Network had been restoring a lot of these old movies. They did the Protectors movies that were done for European release. No, not Protectors, Persuaders.
Persuaders. Yeah.
They're like 5 Persuaders movies or something. So that was the norm back then.
That's why it would have been interesting if 1999 had a theatrical release, and when you think maybe how that could have potentially have been with Breakaway. I mean,
well, technically it did have a theatrical release because you have Spazio 1999.
Oh, that's true.
That premiered several months before the show premiered, in the UK or in America, in Italy. So,
okay.
But that was kind of it really is a ham-fisted edit. It's they edited 3 episodes together and then changed the dubbing dialogue to fit the fact that characters were changing. But now when you look back at it, you go, really is kind of bad that Kano changes from one actor to the next and they still call the character the same name. I think he's Uma all through it.
Right.
It was really strange. The first time I'd seen that is in the SST theater package, Dave, and it was, I think, called together from Breakaway, Another Time, Another Place, Ring Around the Moon.
Yeah,
I think is what it was.
Yeah,
and really, really strange and fascinating on one level.
It's fascinating, but it's badly edited. The Ennio Morricone electronic music really puts a completely different air to it.
It's almost like year 2 with the Wadsworth score. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, no. If you, I mean, we did it first when we did Cosmic Princess. There was some legality with reusing Derek's music, so Bob Mandel tracked in Barry's music. So you've got to see how the 2 scores affected the show.
Oh yeah.
Then of course Network did Seed of Destruction with a year 1 score, and it changes the vibe completely.
It really does. It's amazing the influence music has on whether it be a television show or a series or even a movie. I mean, you can just go in a totally different direction because of that.
Oh, there's been a lot of movies where the scores are thrown out because the score doesn't work for the movie or against it.
Wow.
Years ago, I helped on a soundtrack album that included Chris Young's music for a Canadian film called High Point. I don't know if you're familiar with it. I think it has. It was basically a robbery movie about, and it culminates in a fall from, I think it was either the Space Needle or the CNN Tower, one of those towers, which Dar, I forget the name of the stuntman, Dar something, famous stuntman, did this free fall from the tower. Anyway, they shot this movie with a different score. I think it was by John Addison, and the movie didn't work. So they brought in a script doctor to rewrite and shoot new footage, and they turned it into a comedy. So they threw out the Addison score, brought Chris Young in to score it, and changed it, and the whole movie has a completely different vibe.
Wow.
So you see how it affects it. It's I understood that why he went with Derek, because he needed somebody who could bring that sort of hip 70s vibe to the show, which they all felt they needed this more American action for.
Well, and it's very interesting because Roy and I were talking in just a few weeks' time. We're going to be talking about Ring Around the Moon.
Yeah.
And of course, it has that very contemporary, almost disco style.
Well, we all know why that happened.
Yes.
Story behind that, because that goes back to the fact that Barry Gray wasn't supposed to score Space 999. So.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that in the next 3 episodes from now, so we'll definitely get to that. Warren, one thing that came through, somebody was asking too about earlier, in regards to the special version of Breakaway, the edited version, just about the availability of that, and just putting that out there. So I just thought maybe we could just address that, and if you wanted to, answer that question.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was actually going to just pull this graphic up. It's sitting right there, and
behind
I got
us.
it. It
was there.
Not going to work. Wait.
It's in that little corner there. Just look.
There you go.
There it is. There it is. So and wonderful question, and of course, for anybody who wasn't in London, we did have 2 new presentations or edits of Breakaway that we put together over the last year, and one was called the work print, and the other was the theatrical cut, which was a close approximation. And there's basically there's quite a bit added to it, but there's 3 major scenes, and one has a lot to do with Commander Gorski speaking to Koenig after the fact, and referencing his displeasure with Helena Russell, and dives into a little bit of that tension between the characters, and then the other major scene is at the end during the breakaway itself, and this shot here is one of the ones we actually reinserted. It's really interesting because it's basically from Alan's point of view. From up in orbit, and he sees the red glowing moon, and some of the lost dialogue is him actually describing the catastrophe and what he's seeing. It was really interesting to see back in the episode. And as to the availability itself, that's something that we're still sort of working on. We've been talking to a few people over the last year as the project has sort of morphed and developed from one stage to the next. Roy and David were both there initially in the early days, and very helpful with their efforts. And of course, we hope to make this available to everybody for the 50th anniversary. I think this would be a real special treat for everybody to be able to see these alternate versions. They're not, listen, and one of the things online, and it's hard to keep this argument out of it, not argument, but a lot of people are, we're sort of under the impression that we did find lost footage. Well, we didn't, and so basically, I mean, we didn't find the Holy Grail on the Landau tapes, but we this is sort of like a fan effort or a project to give people a close approximation as to what that footage would have looked like had it been found, and that's how we came up with the work print first. So we sort of went backward with technology and devised this very very rough, crude-looking edit. And then we sort of, with another fellow, Dave Thomas, really helped develop that theatrical cut as well, where we cropped it in widescreen. And Dave was very instrumental in the cutting of those. Basically, the lost audio scenes are interspersed with still photos of the characters speaking at the time, and it goes back and forth to give you a sense of the visuals. But yes, so hopefully sometime this or 2025, we'll see an official release for that. I think that would be awesome.
Well, you could certainly, read. We novelized the early scripts in this book from Anderson Entertainment, and we explain a lot of the cuts in this one. This one is on Amazon.
That's right.
But one of the things that's striking is, like Chris Ty said about that shot. It's a great shot that they didn't use. But the thing that's really interesting is the way Belak described the moon after the explosion. I mean, he described it as like a nightmare world where the back half of the moon was completely gone. And for whatever reason, I guess they just decided not to show that. I mean, I know originally, Jerry pitched the idea of blowing up the Earth as the reason the moon is floating in space. And Abe Mandel thought that was too depressing, so they decided to blow up the moon instead. And I guess they thought that was too depressing, so they made it simple, because, we just saw a regular moon eventually just floating through space. I was very disappointed in Seance Spectre when they go back to supposedly Area 2, and it doesn't look like anything ever happened to it. I expected some real, melted, twisted nightmare, and we just see a completely different Area 3.
He refers to it as the old nuclear waste silos, and it would have been kind of interesting had there been a little bit more to it, or like you said, if there was some reference to Area 2 or like an extension, something, because it again, I mean, and this
it looked like somebody went to a lot of effort to clean it up for no reason at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And we'll have a lot of fun talking about that in the weeks to come in regards to that. That is interesting. Actually, that episode is one of my favorites from the second year. My biggest complaint about that is I wish it had been a 2-part episode, because I think even though it is kind of like similar in regards to Collision Course with certain things, the aspect of dealing with Alphans that were really having a problem with the psychological effects of being stranded on the moon, and it wasn't all hunky-dory, and just really trying to come to grips. The fact that you had, a team that was on the moon for maybe 30 days and just doing exploration. I mean, you could have delved into so much with that. And I really think that the essence of that story, really, there was a lot of meat and potatoes with that I really think they could have really gone and really expanded upon. Plus, I love the direction of Peter Medic with the camera angles and the different perspectives. To me, that episode
was rare for the second series that they had the opportunity to do that. But that goes back to, again, George Belak. I mean, that was part of some of the ideas that he had suggested originally. I mean, we had this vast moon base. You were supposed to have all these teams working on the lunar surface, and we never really went there.
Right.
You establish in Exiles that there's this external lab, that's remote. What goes on there? Some of the other buildings, we see the structure in Journey to Where that's outside the moon base. So all these external structures, they never went back to.
Right.
They never had story. The E.C. Tubb, John Rankin novels did stories about things on the moon. I mean, the moon it's a big place. Yeah. There's so many more stories that could have happened on other parts of the moon that they never went to.
Right. I mean, and there's some and this is where inconsistencies come up. And again, we will be addressing this down the road in regards to that. But it definitely lends for a lot of stories that could have been developed and a lot of tie-ins. So again, an exciting time to talk about Space 1999 here in this forum, which is really, really cool. I see that I'm just putting some. I've been trying to post some of the comments up that have been coming through as we've been
Yeah,
having.
I was thinking we should maybe circle back and filter through some questions that people may have, Roy. There was one that I saw online earlier this week, if I can paraphrase. It was essentially, I did actually upload the broadcast version of Breakaway here just recently, and there was a lady out there. I'm sorry, I forget your name, but she had watched it for the first time in many years, Breakaway, and she had some interesting points. How do you guys feel that Breakaway stands up 50 years later from some of the perspective of social commentary, and in particular some of the environmental issues that they were trying to portray there?
Well, they still hold up, the environmental issues. You know, I was reading the other day a story where they're doing a study right now about the fact that nuclear propulsion has been very successful in submarines. And there has not been any major incidents. It's no pollution, whatever. And they're looking into it for cargo ships because it's certainly, this whole push for green energy. The one fallacy with electric cars is the fact that you're still mining all the metals for the batteries, which in itself pollutes the environment where you're mining. So the idea that if this is handled properly, I mean, nuclear energy was supposed to be the future, but there were a number of mishaps that caused people to hold back. I mean, even in Japan with the Fukushima disaster, that really, put a dampener on their enthusiasm for it. It's still, if it's handled properly, it's actually pretty clean energy.
It is, but those problems that Breakaway kind of grapples with. What do you do with the waste?
Yeah, exactly.
It's still an ongoing issue. It's something we're still thinking
because
about.
we know there are sites where they bury waste on old weapons and stuff, and what happens, to those sites.
Well, they blow us out of orbit. That's what happens.
Well, yeah. Well, we don't want to do that. That's why we're not burying anything on the moon. We're smart. Someone figured that out.
Someone figured that out.
But also, the whole financial thing.
Right.
You hear about. I mean, now you have billionaires going into space because they can afford it, but the country and governments aren't really doing space because, well, it came up. Why not spend it on social issues, which makes a lot of sense, but there are things that we learned from space that improved our lives. So it's a bit of a trade-off. It's you can argue either way. So there's always that. I mean, that's the one thing that the Andersons really had in a lot of their shows was, I mean, UFO was rife with the whole idea of government spending. Straker was constantly battling with General Henderson over Shadow's budget.
And you took the words out of my mouth about UFO, because look, I mean, you had private industries going up to the moon and doing their own thing. And that's fast forward. That's what's happening, potentially now. It's not, I mean, growing up, it was NASA. NASA was, it was NASA.
Growing up, it was NASA, but look at any of the films from the 50s. Destination Moon, Rocket Ship XM, it's all private companies going on.
Exactly.
Private individuals, back then it was millionaires because, the value of the dollar. So it's very truthful to that. If a moon base was ever built, it has to be with international cooperation, just like the International Space Station was built with international cooperation.
True.
That's a great point.
So, they had a lot of things that were, correct. George Ballack was not a scientist. They really didn't have a scientific advisor on the show, but he was really concerned when he planned things out as to how the moon base functioned. And he thought these things out.
It disturbs me to read the Isaac Asimov New York Times piece about the series.
Yeah.
Because it's very clear to me from watching the show that there was, while there's a lot of stuff that's not necessarily plausible about Space 1999, there was a real effort to try and make it feel grounded.
Well, that was plot-wise. That was not plausible so much as the location, because there was even a letter that was published in Variety from Werner von Braun, who was very impressed with the appearance of the moon base. That it was a very plausible idea that a moon base might be set up in that way.
Functional,
functional, scientific. For all it's said and done, as a moonship, the Eagle is a very good design. It's a very practical design. The fact that it ended up having to fly through atmosphere was really just a concession to the storyline, because it would have been impractical financially for the show to have different spaceships for different functions.
Yeah.
But UFO, on the other hand, played that up, where they mentioned that the interceptors were not designed to go into the Earth's atmosphere.
Right.
So they had a specific moonship that flew from Earth to the moon.
Those shuttles. Yeah.
Right. So ideally, they would have had a different ship for planet landings, but why would they? Because it was, it's like, we talked about for the tech manual, we talked about the fact that why would they have winter gear in Deaths of the Dominion? So I said, well, my thought was it just was accidentally shipped to them from Arctic Base Alpha. They just got a delivery that was wrong, and they didn't have a chance to return it before the moon was out of Earth's orbit.
And they made use of it.
Otherwise, you're dealing with the Gilligan's Island effect.
Right.
Where they have, why does a boat on a 3-hour tour have clothing for 5 years on it?
Or the Jupiter 2 having that one episode, I think it was Wild Adventure, when they say they acquire. It's amazing all the stuff that you acquire. It's like, really?
Well, remember the 3rd season episode where Smith sets up a hotel?
Yes.
And he's got wicker chairs.
Yeah.
Where did he get wicker chairs from?
He had Robbie weave them.
Yeah,
the robots just weaving wicker chairs.
So yeah, well, there actually is an episode where the robot replicates stuff.
Right.
But I still can't see how he replicated a wicker chair.
Yeah, exactly. But guys, we're coming up under the second top of the hour, so we probably should think about, this has been a wonderful conversation, and this has just been great as far as kicking off our pilot episode. And I don't know, Warren, last thoughts with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, it's been fantastic, fellas, and I was just going to throw in at the end of that discussion there that we should give a nod, and there's no denying it. Part of the reason we're here 50 years later was just the overall technical design of the series from the Eagle perspective. Keith Wilson's interior designs, just fantastic that they were so ahead of their time, and they've really stood the test of time, and so shout out to folks like that, and Brian Johnson, and all the people that came together to create this wonderful series of ours,
behind the scenes and in front of the camera.
It's just amazing that they were able to do what they did. And it wasn't like today's shows where you have armies of production people. I mean, Keith Wilson did all for the first season. He did all the set designs, all the costume designs, all the makeup designs. It's so much materially churned out. It's amazing the man didn't have a nervous breakdown.
Yeah, remarkable. I wish I would have met him.
Yeah,
and, wasn't he in Breakaway in '99 or 2000?
He was in 2000. I don't remember if he was at the Breakaway convention in '99, but he definitely was in New York City in 2000. Yeah, really nice guy.
Yeah, I would have liked to have met him as well.
Yeah,
awesome. Hey Ben, just really quickly, what were your overall thoughts and impressions? We haven't had a chance to speak about London. You had a good time?
Oh yeah. We had so much fun. I was really grateful for the opportunity to get to go.
Don't rub it in.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Lovely thing.
I know.
And David was very much missed. I was looking around and I was like, I really wish David was here. I wish John Kenneth Muir was here.
Yeah,
all my American friends.
Yeah, but so many people I've never had. I've never had a chance to meet Jamie in person, which would have been nice.
Right.
So many of the other people, but it just was never I don't think Chris let anyone hold Eagle 2.
I didn't see
Because-
any of that.
Oh, you mean Andrew?
I've held the other two. I would have wanted to hold that. So he's
Andrew-
lucky I didn't show.
No, what about Andrew owns Eagle 2?
Yeah,
Andrew, sorry, Andrew.
I was really happy Tim let me play with the giant eagle playset that they were talking about earlier.
Oh, yes.
And
Yeah.
I actually got to take apart the engine module and the front, because that's something that I always wanted from seeing the commercials.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh, I'd love to play with that. So I got to take it and fly it around. I actually ran around the room and flew it.
Well, that's the whole point of that thing. Is
Exactly.
to
It's
play
great
with
to play
it,
with
but now it looks
toy.
a little bit more screen accurate. Than
It does, and
the
it's
television.
amazing what they've done. Definitely support them, because they're doing a really cool thing.
I wish I had room for it, but fortunately,
But I don't have room for it either.
no. I
So big.
recently unpacked all these little Japanese figures that I had for years, and I'm barely finding room for half of them. So
Just gonna have to start your own museum, David. The collection.
believe me, we were in Japan in in June, and I was very frugal as to buying stuff because I just
Have to be.
had no room for anything.
Absolutely.
So, but I could have broken the bank. I mean, we
Easily.
spent that on the trip, but
Well, okay, we are approaching that time, fellas. We're right around that 2-hour mark. Anything else? Anybody else wanted to throw in there at the very end?
Just to say thank you to you and Roy for your work on this, and looking forward to being a part of it and seeing where you guys go with the rest of the episodes.
Thank you for your help, and
thank you, Ben. We appreciate it, and we're looking forward to having you as our producer. And this is just a wonderful opportunity for us to collaborate. And just bring
Catherine again, Catherine Bougeot.
She's out there.
Yeah, Catherine did some wonderful stuff for the Super Space Theater movies, which was terrific.
Is incredible.
Yeah,
can't say enough.
Catherine.
And Dave, always wonderful to see
Catherine, no moving stars. Don't do moving stars because they wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Dave, certainly pass along our hello to Renee as well.
Yes.
And all the best. And I think we'll call it then and say thank you to everybody out there who's tuned in as well. And keep watching. Thank you all for the support on the new YouTube channel as well. We were up over 130 subscribers before we even went live today, and we only launched less than a week ago. So
amazing.
And I would certainly love to talk with you guys about some of the other episodes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And if anybody out there, I mean, the whole idea here is we're going to have some creatives and celebrity guests on, but fans as well. If you have a favorite episode that you'd like to come on, like I said on the pilot episode, we basically got 48 open slots at this point. So drop us a line, and we'll try and get you on there and schedule everybody in. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
And what we're going to do is we usually do the closure.
My show.
As far as closing out, the Eagle's taking off.
No, it's landing.
Oh, it's landing. There you go.
That's sound effects that I sent to Jeffrey for the documentary.
Nice.
Yeah.
But we were thinking of, as far as a closing, and Isabel Hoy had come up with something, because we usually do the live long and prosper.
It was Dallas. It was Dallas.
Dallas. I'm sorry. Yep. Sorry. But as far as a closing, saying
forgive us, viewers, we're old. All the time.
And I said we got to come up with our own Space 1999 catchphrase, and we came up with Dallas came up with. Roy, you go ahead.
Until tomorrow, Ron from Missing Link. So, until tomorrow, everyone.
Until tomorrow, thank you again, and we'll see everybody next week for a matter of life and death.
We'll talk about that one. That was the first completed episode.
Yep. Lots to dive into there as well. You're right.
And different titles too.
And we could just quickly say that special guests for Matter of Life and Death are going to be Dave Thomas from the UK, as well as Mr. Robert Wood.
Yes.
So,
wow.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right.
Take care, everyone.
See you guys.
You bet.
Good
Bye.
seeing you.
Bye-bye.